You unwrap the box on Christmas morning, and inside is a toy unlike anything you have ever seen. 4 small glass jars, a silver handheld device with a dial and a switch, a comic book starring a cartoon father splitting the atom at the kitchen table. Your parents paid $50 for this. That is more than a week's wages in 1950, and this is not a joke, and it is not a prop. Every jar in that box contains real, actual uranium ore. What you are holding is a genuine piece of American history. It is called the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab. For most of the 20th century, radioactivity was something you read about in a newspaper, something handled by men in white coats, behind guarded doors, in buildings you were never allowed near. But for 2 strange years, starting in 1950, it was something you could buy at a toy store and carry home to your own bedroom. How did that happen? And what does it tell you about the country that made it possible? The man behind the toy was Alfred Carlton Gilbert. You may not know his name, but you likely know his work. He invented the Erector Set, the metal construction toy that had already shaped a generation of American childhoods by the time the atomic age arrived. Gilbert believed toys built character. He believed a child who understood how a bridge held its weight, or how a motor turned, grew into an adult who could build the future with his own hands. So when the atom split, and the world changed with it, Gilbert did not see a reason to stop teaching. In 1950, his company released the U-238 Atomic Energy Lab. Inside the box, 4 jars of uranium-bearing ore, mined from the Colorado Plateau. A battery-powered Geiger counter, to measure radiation as it happened. A spinthariscope, a small brass device that lets you watch individual atoms decay in real time, each one a tiny flash of light in the dark. An electroscope, a Wilson cloud chamber, so you could watch the actual physical tracks left behind by radioactive particles as they tore through the air. And a 60-page instruction manual, written by physicist Dr. Ralph E. Lapp, a man who had worked directly on the Manhattan Project just a few years earlier. Gilbert wanted this toy to feel official, not novelty. So the box also included a comic book. Learn How Dagwood Splits the Atom, produced with help from General Leslie Groves, the very man who had directed the Manhattan Project. Think about that for a second. A general who had overseen the construction of the actual atomic bomb was willing to lend his name to a children's toy. That single detail tells you almost everything about how the country felt about the atom in 1950. It did not feel like fear. It felt like hope. Historian Paul Boyer, who spent years studying how Americans understood nuclear weapons in the years after Hiroshima, described this period as a kind of atomic optimism, a brief window when the same technology that had leveled 2 cities was simultaneously being sold to the public as the engine of a golden future. Atomic-powered cars were coming, the magazines promised. Atomic medicine, atomic farming. The bomb itself was terrifying. But the atom, separated from the bomb and the public imagination, was something else entirely. The atom was progress. The atom was tomorrow, arriving early. And so a toy company put real radioactive material into a cardboard box and mailed it directly to your house. Was it safe? That is the question everyone asks first, so let's answer it honestly. Mostly, yes. The uranium ore included in the kit was certified by Oak Ridge National Laboratory, part of the Atomic Energy Commission, as safe for a child to handle under normal use. Later scientific analysis estimated that a child using the kit exactly as instructed would absorb roughly the same amount of radiation as spending a single day out in ordinary sunlight. Bananas are mildly radioactive. Brazil nuts are mildly radioactive. In the grand scheme of things, this was not so different. But here is where it gets stranger. The manual did warn you not to open the jars, not because of your safety, though. The concern was that loose ore might crumble and scatter across your work table, contaminating the room and throwing off future Geiger counter readings. In other words, the company's real worry was not radioactive contamination of a child. It was radioactive contamination of the science experiment. So picture it. You are 8, maybe 10 years old. You have cleared off your desk the way the manual instructs. You switch on the Geiger counter and hold its wand close to the jar, and it begins to click, faster and faster, an invisible force made suddenly, thrillingly audible in your own bedroom. You press your eye to the spinthariscope and watch tiny flashes of light bloom in the darkness, one after another, each flash an atom breaking apart. It is the same fundamental process that, in a far more violent form, had ended a war only 5 years earlier, and nobody in the room is afraid. Your mother is standing in the doorway, smiling. This is what a promising child does on a Saturday afternoon in 1950. Here is the twist almost nobody expects. The toy flopped. Gilbert had priced the kit at $49.50, the equivalent of more than $500 today, because its components were genuinely expensive to produce and test. It turned out that most children did not want a serious scientific instrument that came with a 60-page manual. They wanted something to play with. Fewer than 5,000 units were ever sold across the 2 years it stayed on shelves before being quietly discontinued. Columbia University, of all customers, purchased 5 sets for its physics department, which tells you fairly precisely who the kit actually appealed to. It was not a scandal that killed the Gilbert U-238 atomic energy lab. It was boredom. And that detail should sit with you longer than the uranium does. This was not a fringe product. It was not a black market oddity slipped past regulators in the dead of night. It was a mainstream toy, made by one of the most trusted names in the industry, endorsed by an actual Manhattan Project general, built by a man who genuinely believed he was raising the next generation of American scientists. Nobody hid what was inside the box. Nobody felt they needed to. In 1950, finding radioactive material in a child's bedroom was not a warning sign. It was a selling point printed right on the label. And that is not even the part that should worry you most. Think about how differently this plays out today. A single trace of lead paint on an imported toy triggers a nationwide recall within days. Parents read the ingredient labels on children's modeling clay. Regulatory agencies test for chemicals measured in parts per billion. And yet for 2 full years, in that exact same country, a family could walk into a department store and buy their child actual uranium ore. No license required, no age restriction enforced. Nothing standing between the product and the shelf but a comic book and a warning about Geiger counter-accuracy. What changed was not the radiation itself. Uranium ore is precisely as dangerous today as it was in 1950. The physics never moved an inch. What changed was what an entire country was willing to hand a child without a second thought, and what, somewhere in the decades since, we quietly decided was too dangerous to trust to hope alone. You did not have to fear the atom in 1950. That fear arrived later, slowly, as the decade wore on. As the weapons tests grew larger and the newsreels grew grimmer and backyard shelters began appearing on quiet suburban streets. But for one strange, brief moment, right at the very beginning, the same force that had ended a war was something a child could unwrap on a Saturday morning and hold. Quite literally, in 2 small hands. You unwrap the box, and inside is a toy unlike anything you have ever seen. Only now, you know exactly what was sitting inside those jars. And you know exactly why nobody standing in that room in 1950 felt any reason at all to be afraid.